12-gate treatise. Translated, with introductory essays, comments, and notes by Hsueh-li Cheng, 1982. 7. Nature. Nature here refers to essence, essif nature or fundamental nature behind a manifestation or expression. Nãgãrjuna wants to show that the characteristic of nature cannot be established, and hence to demonstrate that all things are empty. Nãgãrjuna also argues that the doctrine of emptiness is not nihilism and does not make Buddhism impossible. Instead, the doctrine is given to save, or account for, empirical phenomena and religious practices.
Again, all things are empty. Why? Because things have no nature. As it is written, by observing that the characteristics of all things change, we know all things are devoid of nature. Things which are devoid of nature are also non-existent, so all things are empty. If things have a nature, they should not be changing. But we see that all things are changing. Therefore we know that they are devoid of nature. Again, if things have a determinate nature, they should not be produced by conditions. If nature is produced by conditions, then it is that which is made. Yet, nature, as defined, is that which is not made and not causally dependent upon other things. Therefore, all things are empty.
Question: if all things are empty, then there can be no origination or destruction. If there are no origination and destruction, then there can be no truth of suffering. If there is no truth of suffering, there can be no truth of the arising of suffering. If there are no truths of suffering and its arising, there can be no truth of the cessation of suffering. If there is no cessation of suffering, there can be no way leading to the cessation of suffering. If all things are empty and without nature, there can be no Four Noble Truths. If there are no Four Noble Truths, there can be no Four Fruits of Sramana. If there are no Four Fruits of the Srama-dhatja, there can be no sainthood. If there are none of these things, there can be no Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And there can be no principle of worldly affairs. But these are not so. Therefore, things cannot all be empty.
Answer: there are two truths, namely, conventional truth and ultimate truth. Because of conventional truth, ultimate truth is attainable. Without relying on conventional truth, ultimate truth cannot be attained. Without attaining ultimate truth, nirvana cannot be attained. If one does not know two truths, he cannot know essif interest, other interest and common interest. Thus, if one knows conventional truth, he then knows ultimate truth, and if one knows ultimate truth, he knows conventional truth. Now you hear of conventional truth and call it ultimate truth, and hence become lost. The doctrine of causation given by Buddhists is called the profound truth. Causation is devoid of essif nature, and hence say, all things are empty. If things are not produced by conditions, they should have their own determinate nature.
There can be no marks of origination and destruction in the five skandhas. If there is no origination and no destruction in the five skandhas, there can be no impermanence. If there is no impermanence, there can be no noble truth of suffering. If there is no noble truth of suffering, there can be no noble truth of the arising of suffering. If things have a determinate nature, there can be no noble truth of the removal of suffering. Why? Because natures cannot be changed. If there is no noble truth of the removal of suffering, there can be no way leading to the removal of suffering. Therefore, if we do not accept the doctrine of emptiness, there can be no Four Noble Truths. If there are no Four Noble Truths, there can be no possession of the Four Noble Truths. If there is no possession of the Four Noble Truths, there can be no such things as knowing suffering, eliminating the cause of suffering, proving the removal of suffering and cultivating the way leading to the removal of suffering. If those things cannot be, there can be no Four Fruits of Sramana. If there are no Four Fruits of Sramana, there can be no goal for the religious life. If there is no goal, there can be no Buddha. If the truth of causation is denied, there can be no Dharma. If there is no Dharma, there can be no Safalga. If there are no Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, then there can be no Three Jewels. If there are no Three Jewels, the principle of the world is denied. But this is absurd. Therefore all things are empty.
Again, if things have determinate natures, there can be no origination, no destruction, and no good or evil. If there is no reward or punishment for good and evil, the world can be but one scene. Therefore, we should know that things have no nature. If it is argued that things have no as-if nature and are made from other nature, this cannot be true either. Why? Because if there is no as-if nature, how can they come into being from other nature, for owing to as-if nature there is other nature. And other nature is a kind of as-if nature too. Why? Because other nature is the as-if nature of others. If as-if nature cannot be established, other nature cannot be established either. Without as-if nature and other nature, how can there be anything? If being cannot be established, non-being cannot be established either. Now we infer, therefore, that since there is no as-if nature, no other nature, no being and no non-being, all created things are empty. Since created things are empty, non-created things are empty. Since even created and non-created things are empty, what of the seef?